Brain Cuttings 15 Journeys Through the Mind by Carl Zimmer by Martin Ramos. Disorders and How They Affect the Brain. I chose this book because I'm interested in understanding how the brain works and how it is experimented on. Looking at the table of content, the book is broken into 15 chapters, with each chapter highlighting a different subsection of the brain. These are categories like fear, how fast or slow we think, and consciousness, etc. Out of these topics, I wanted to explore the topic of disorders, how people get them, and how they affect the brain. I chose to study the topic of disorder and their effects on the brain because of how common they are and how little people really know about where specific disorders actually come from. In this book, Carl Zimmer explains the occurrence of some mental disorders through research like autism, depression, and schizophrenia. Question 1. My first question I was hoping this book would answer is how a parent's gene can affect the mental disorder of their child. I asked this question because I always wondered, how do two people who do not have a disorder give birth to children with disorder? Is there any way that you can specifically avoid passing on a gene by choosing a partner with or without a specific gene? Carl Zimmer answered this question by using the examples of Angelman syndrome and Prader-Willi syndrome to show two specific disorders come from evolutionary response to a silencing defect on either mother or the father's chromosome 15, when neither parent has either disorder. Angelman syndrome was first reported in 1965 by Harry Angelman as a syndrome found in children characterized by having difficulties learning, seizures, more facial features, and an overall happy and social attitude. Zimmer compared these symptoms to be the same as autism. With Angelman syndrome, the silencing defect is on the mother's chromosome 15, which makes the gene of the father able to be passed on in the form of traits that almost encourage the child to need more attention or food, or be a pleasant child to make sure that they are nurtured by their mother successfully to continue passing down the father's DNA. Question 1 continued. On the other hand, children who had Prader-Willi syndrome tend not to nurse as babies, which later in life leave them to be short, have small hands or feet, learning and behavioral disabilities, and in some cases develop schizophrenia. As they grow, their appetites expand, and they are often obese as adults. The difference is that the defect is on the father's chromosome 15 and is silenced by the mother's gene so that the offspring isn't too demanding of the mother's attention in its early years, so she can nurture all her children equally. This is a rare example of cases where children can develop a syndrome that neither parent technically carries. Question 2. The second question that I like for this book to answer is, how does the brain react to fear and why? Zimmer answered this by citing an experiment conducted by neuroscientist Dean Mobb at Harvard. This experiment involved a survival video game of predator versus prey, where the prey's reactions were recorded to be chased by a predator. For this experiment, Zimmer suggested that fear is a multi-step process or strategy that is used to handle being in danger at that moment. Another example of this is the Little Albert experiment. In this experiment, a baby was exposed to a rat. When they tried to reach out to it and touch it, someone would create a loud and unpleasant noise of metal hitting metal. Over time, the child became traumatized by the association of the rat and the loud clang. Question 3. The third question I had for this book is how our brains cope with trauma long after we experience them. So the mentioning experiment, like the Little Albert experiment, Zimmer shows the effect of fear in a short time span, but didn't really mention how they affect us after. Unfortunately, the book didn't expand on this. Doing further research, I learned that the child in the experiment died from hydrocephalus at 6, and according to What Happened to Little Albert, written by Ben Harris at Vassar College, researchers weren't able to see if the child's fear for the rats ever went away or if it worsened after showing fear for a similar soft, white, and furry object after the experiment. Also, would be curious to see how something like that could be reversed if possible, and how. While this book provided a lot of interesting stories about research and experiments, I didn't learn too much about what I had originally thought the book would explain. However, the stories this book used to teach are perfect examples, and I find it very easy to digest each one.